The release of the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One heralds the beginning of games which look like what we imagine next-gen will look like, and standing as one of the graphical highlights of the launch is Killzone Shadow Fall. But does it have the goods to back up the flash and bombast? Is it a rote experience of shooting galleries and monster closets, or something more? Let's find out. Taking place 20 years after armies from the planet Vecta destroyed the home planet of the villainous Helghast, Killzone Shadow Fall is the story of Shadow Marshal Lucas Kellen, a special agent of the Vectan Security Agency. The surviving Helghast live as refugees in their chunk of Vecta, surrounded by a massive wall intended to keep them within their new Helgen. Tensions remain between Vectans and Helghast, however, and Lucas is the VSA's most capable agent in a covert battle against New Helgen, until a chance encounter with the half-Helgen Echo begins to make him question the nature of the conflict. It's not a bad story, particularly by the standards of shooter games, but its most impressive aspect is also that which makes it disappointing. It comes incredibly close to saying a handful of things, but stops just short of committing. The Cold War-era undercurrent of tensions between the two societies was incredibly intriguing at first, but is tragically underused as the story goes on, or the relationship between Lucas and Echo could have been more fleshed out, though I applaud the story for not forcing a cliched romance. The biggest misstep comes in the overarching question of who is right in this conflict with heroes and villains on both sides, and the fault here is that the game tells us the answer. But, in the end, the story is not why you're here. You're here to blam-blam the bad guys, and Killzone does the blam-blam thing very well. I really must take a moment to emphasize how good it feels to fire the weapons in this game. Through excellent sound design and amazing particle effects, the act of firing a weapon at an enemy has so much punch that I was taken aback the first time it happened. This extends to almost the entirety of the game's arsenal, which thankfully makes up for the fact that the variety isn't that amazing. VSA Assault Rifle, Helghast Assault Rifle, VSA Shotgun, Helghast Shotgun, etc., cycling through the standard equipment you expect from these things. They're a pleasure to use, but they're so familiar that after a while I gave up even trying to figure out if the weapon I was using was the VSA or the Helghast version. Or maybe there aren't different versions? Who knows, you'll use the standard issue VSA rifle for most of the game anyway, because it has a sniper mode. Along with your standard guns, grenades, and melee attacks, there is the Owl, which is Killzone Shadow Fall's new addition to mix up the gameplay. The Owl is your robot companion which can attack enemies, stun enemies, temporarily put up a shield through which only you can shoot, or fire off a zipline to a point of your choosing. Its different actions are selected using the DualShock 4's touchpad, which I found quite intuitive and thought little of after a short while, and the order to use what you selected is placed using the L1 button. The Owl really does mix up combat, and after a while I began to see how I could use its abilities to provide tactical advantages beyond the core functions. For example, sending it off to attack foes can take a few down if you need help, but I found it more effective in some of the game's open environments to use the Owl as a form of suppressing fire. The shield is great on its own, but so much space is exposed that it needs to be managed carefully and you can't get too comfy. The enemy AI is smart enough to flank and surround you. The zipline is fun but underused. An early level in a forest provides ample opportunity to zip from on high and dive from sniping to close quarters, but enough levels lack that verticality that I briefly forgot the ability existed and missed opportunities to use it later on in the game. Speaking of the environments, they vary in scope and linearity, but almost always give you multiple options for handling your foes. Rarely did I feel like I was being thrust into a direct combat situation, and even when I was, it was often within my power to decide where and how the fight would start. That said, The game's occasional pauses to let you look around and explore the world gave way after a time, and the game's pace became straining and uncomfortable. There's often just too much happening without any kind of break in the pacing, which may have been intended to give the sense of chaos, but ended up just making me feel burned out on things after a little while. I also have to comment on one particular monkey wrench they throw in the admirably varied enemy types: the shielded enemies. I don't quite know what was going on when the shielded enemies came about, but the specifics of how to fight these foes are a little vague, and I was discouraged from the Halo-tested shoot until the shield pops strategy when an in-game tip told me to use a particular weapon against them. That was troublesome in its own right, because in the chaos of battle, I am in no mood to rifle through the confusing mess of letters and numbers that make up the large portions of each of their titles. Here's a pro tip. Ignore what the game tells you about using a specific weapon, though feel free to use the owl's stun against them as it also suggests. Get a gun that fires a lot of bullets and then fire a lot of bullets at them. Or do what I did and bum rush them with a melee attack. This is a symptom of a larger problem within the campaign. It's bloody difficult, and not in a great way. Lucas takes damage very quickly, and enemies come at you in very large numbers very often. There is cover, but oftentimes Lucas won't do anything with it because it's too low and he has the highest crouch stance in FPS history. The snipers are absolutely brutal and can be very frustrating to find amidst the impressively detailed environments, and my initial admiration of properly camouflaged enemies gave way to annoyance when I discovered that snipers have the ability to teleport at will. This makes hunting for snipers even worse and wholly unsatisfying, as I walked away feeling that I was only able to take them down when the game decided it was finally okay with me doing so. Lucas is highly mobile in ways which are ripped straight out of Far Cry 3, including almost the same sliding animation and the very same drop-down melee attack and throwing knife melee attack combo, and all of this is tons of fun, but you're vulnerable during melee attacks here, and the animations are just long enough to take you from full health to almost dead if you haven't gone for an opponent completely separated from the large numbers of foes thrown at you. The lengthy melee animations are likely a concession for the multiplayer mode, as the attacker can be interrupted by the victim's allies before the kill actually happens. It's entertaining enough there, but a real bummer in the campaign. Killzone Shadow Fall's multiplayer is solid, with maps that are sizable enough to accompany the max of 24 players and the objectives they'll all be going after. While you can play deathmatch, war zones are a ton of fun to play. Two teams battle it out over varying objectives, with the team completing the most objectives being crowned the victor. The mobility I appreciated in single player makes for a mode that functions at just the right pace. The dramatic arc of a good multiplayer match, with the slow tension of the opening moments to the crescendo of violence in the middle, tapering off into more measured tactical advances towards the end, is absolutely present in every match, and it's great. There are 3 classes with the requisite customizable loadouts divided into Assault, Support, and Scout, each with individual abilities. The core of it comes down to rifles and a backup buddy drone for Assault, sniper rifles and cloak for Scout, machine guns of varying heft and reviving for support. I always gravitate towards support classes, and here it was no different. Being able to plant temporary spawn points in the field reshapes the nature of each fight. And reviving teammates is done with the touch of a button, even at distances, and is a great way to reinforce your team's front line without having to take your mind off the action. The unlock and leveling systems are different, but welcome for players who aren't interested in committing massive amounts of life into multiplayer. All classes, weapons, and abilities are unlocked from the very beginning, so that the players at level amazing won't have an advantage over the players like me at level stupid. Advancement and unlocks still exist, however, through the completion of challenges and matches, such as killing blank number of enemies looking down the sights, killing someone holding an objective, etc., and those go towards unlocking attachments and ability upgrades. It gives the mode a very friendly feeling, where other such games now boast a relatively high skill barrier of entry. Last but not least, I must mention the presentation. Killzone Shadow Fall at its best, and it is at its best often, is an amazing first step into a new generation of hardware. The textures are so sharp, the animations are smooth, the models are varied and impressive, and the environments are occasionally breathtaking. What impressed me above all is how the presentation was put towards establishing a vibe and an atmosphere. This is what I want to see out of the new generation. Prettier explosions are nice, but if the technology isn't used to build a more rich world, it's not being used to its fullest potential. On the audio side of things, while I must reiterate how much I loved the sound design, the soundtrack did not win me over. I quite like the sweeping orchestral scores in previous Killzone games, Killzone 2 in particular, and while the more toned down and electric style of the soundtrack makes enough sense given the plot and setting, it never really becomes more than background noise. The voice acting varies. Lucas's actor sounds like he's trying and failing to hide an accent, and the smorgasbord of European voices thrown at the Helghast occasionally becomes humorous. One minor character sounded so much like Javier Bardem that I had to pause the game and check to see if he was in the cast. He's not, by the way. On the other side of things, Jamie Greyhider brings whatever pathos the script gives her room for into Echo, and David Harewood took Sinclair, a potentially one-note character, and did what he could to give the character some dimension. A thrilling, if flawed, campaign with enough promise to be worth your time, and a fun multiplayer mode with just real potential make this a great blockbuster to kick off the PlayStation's initial lineup. It may not be a giant generational leap, but Killzone Shadow Fall is one hell of a first step.